Hey everyone, Bob Bordone here. We are trying something new and hopefully something really fun. And it's going to be me reacting to current news events with a negotiation angle to them. So every week I'll be on here. I'll get a few questions about news events. And my goal is to try to give a negotiation analyst, a negotiation expert view on it with some lessons that are usable for you. So, with that, let's get into it.
After hours of debate and last-minute deals, the Senate voted 51 to 48 to approve what's called a rescissions package. Now, in simple terms, this is taking back unused federal funding, including money for foreign aid and public broadcasting.
You know, one of the big bills that just passed that's causing a lot of stir is the bill that is going to rescind about $9 billion from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and from NPR. And people are talking about the implications of that for public broadcasting and NPR. But it also has some pretty big implications for future congressional negotiations, especially around budget. And here's why. So, for context, remember that when there's a rescission, what that actually means is that the Congress already passed funds and then it is deciding to take those funds away. Here's the implication. There was a budget negotiation that happened between Democrats and Republicans that originally resulted in the allocation of the funds to, in this case, PBS and NPR. Now, imagine a new set of negotiations coming around a future budget. Part of what makes that negotiation workable or possible is that there is a good faith belief from both Democrats and Republicans that if they agree to X, if there are compromises, if we decide to, let's say, fund public parks or the EPA in exchange for, let's say, an increase in military budgets or ICE or a fence along the border, part of what makes that negotiation work is the belief that when we then actually vote on that to pass that, that it's going to happen. Well, now we have this new situation where an agreement that is made suddenly gets rescinded or reopened.
No! God, please, no! No!
That actually makes future negotiations much tougher on both sides. Because if there's no good faith that actually we're going to follow through, we say yes, yes on Monday, and then 3 weeks later we're actually pulling back some of the funds. I now have a much more complicated negotiation.
You have to trust me. Trust needs to be earned.
And so one of the things that I think has just not gotten covered in any way from a negotiation perspective, and this occurs not just in the domestic budget situation, but also in the international arena, which is that when you make an agreement, part of what people expect you to be able to do is to follow through. And as soon as you lose that credibility, either because you're backing out of a treaty or because you are backing out of an agreement you made, it actually reduces your credibility going forward. And so my prediction on this is that we're going to see future budget negotiations that are going to be much tougher. And from a broader negotiation lesson perspective, I think it's really important that when you're in a negotiation, you say what you mean and you mean what you say, because if you agree to something and make a commitment and then start to undo that, you may be able to force it through with sheer power, but it's going to reduce your credibility, it's going to reduce your trustworthiness going forward, and particularly when you're out of power, those things matter. One of the questions I imagine at least some of you might be thinking is, how do you negotiate with somebody who you reach an agreement with them on Monday and on Wednesday they're changing the terms?
Oh, this is so frustrating.
The first thing is, are there some ways that you can build in some kind of compliance pieces? So oftentimes when there's low trust, instead of saying we're going to agree to A through Z, the way the agreement is structured is when you do A, then I have to do B. I don't have to do C until you've done the next one, right? So that there's incremental moves that assure at least that there's some increased likelihood of compliance. Second thing you might think about is some kind of agreed upon consequence if there is noncompliance. Now, that's not always possible. Ways that you can make it possible sometimes could be involving a third party in some way. So, just to give you a few examples, right? In many contexts, you might have a mediator or some kind of third party who has some kind of enforcement capacity. Maybe in a family situation, if it's siblings who are disagreeing, but we both really think that, Uncle Wally is trustworthy, we let Uncle Wally know what we agreed to. So there are ways of kind of structuring in someone who can help enforce in some way. The last thing I'll say, right, is that if you are negotiating with someone where there is relatively low trust, sometimes asking for a hostage in some way might work. So what do I mean by a hostage? I don't mean like a real person.
Thanks for the clarification. I'm confused there.
But just to give you an example, right? If I'm in a negotiation with somebody and I'm not entirely sure whether they're going to follow through because of the past, I might say, I need to take a deposit, or I need to hold on to something that doesn't 100% ensure that you're going to follow through, but it increases the likelihood because you've given me something of value that is not the 100% thing we've negotiated on, but that is a proxy for your intention to follow through.
So August 1 is just days away, and so also is the deadline for nations to reach deals with the Trump administration over trade and tariffs.
So one of the biggest ongoing negotiations over the past few months has been around tariffs and tariff threats. And as many of you are watching probably know, President Trump has set this date of August 1st as a deadline for all of these many countries in the world to reach an agreement with the United States. Otherwise, they're going to get imposed with huge tariffs. And there's so many negotiation questions that emerge around this. And in fact, at the morning of our recording here, there was an announcement that the United States and Japan just reached an agreement on tariffs. So Japan is going to be spared these big tariffs from the United States. But of course, in other sectors, you have certainly the Europeans who are threatening to counter-retaliate with tariffs. Canada, the Prime Minister, Mark Carney, has said very clearly that he's not going to just succumb to what the United States wants.
I think President Trump probably thinks that we in Canada will cave in, but we are going to stand up to a bully. We're not going to back down. We're united, and we will retaliate.
So the first thing I want to say is one of the ways that people negotiate is around power and what we would call forcing mechanisms. And another way in which people negotiate is around underlying interests or needs. And for those of you who have subscribed to this channel and watched all my videos, and by the way, if you haven't, you should do that now. But for those of you who have done this, right, you know that interest, right, the underlying needs, is a preferred way to negotiate. And part of the reason why is it helps you build relationships, it helps you build trust over time. And relationships or trust are not valuable just in and of themselves. I mean, they're nice, but that is not why we want them. We want them because when we have them, we are more able with our negotiation counterparties to identify ways where we can expand the size of a negotiation pie, where we could be creative, where we can create value for everybody. We could take a 10-point pie and make it worth 20 points or 40 points or 100 points. When we instead negotiate based on coercion or power, we are typically not expanding a negotiation pie. We're taking a 10-point pie and we're saying, we would like to get 7 of those 10 points. In this instance around tariffs, what I would say is that because the United States absolutely has leverage against pretty much every single one of our trading partners, any trading partner we're with is going to have a really unenviable choice. They're going to either have to succumb to us or they're going to face more pain than we are.
Can I get an ouch that hurts?
Ouch, that hurts!
So to be clear, tariffs will impose pain on the global economy and on the United States. But the kind of argument is that they'll impose more pain on our trading partners than on us, and it's probably mostly accurate, and that therefore we're using our leverage to extract concessions, which is also true. The problem with that is that we're losing trust, and we're hurting relationships, and we're not growing the size of the negotiation pie. The other problem with that is as follows. When we use our leverage, what we incentivize other countries to do is to, okay, they may be on their knees, they're going to say yes to us now, but they're going to spend the remaining time or the next bit of time trying to identify how can they be in a better position the next time they have a round of negotiations with us. That means looking for different trading partners than us. And so as soon as you move into a longer term horizon, it seems that tariffs are not the way to go. I want to give one more caveat on tariffs though, because there can be strategic times, particularly in situations where there is for sure a ongoing and very unfair trade advantage that another country is making against, let's say, the United States. And so targeted and strategic tariffs can be a very powerful negotiation tool. So I don't want to be misunderstood to say tariffs are always and forever a bad idea. I think the problem of the administration strategy right now is that they are blanket, they are non-strategic, and they're simply kind of using the leverage of the 600-pound gorilla that is the United States in ways that may give us short-term gains, but I think will hurt us in the long term. One of the challenges is, right, how do we get out of this without looking weak? One is I need to be really crafting the victory speech for my counterparty. And that may sound counterintuitive, but it's really important. The only way out of this situation is not for me to bludgeon you to death.
Whoa. Yeah.
But to really think about what is something that I can offer that will sound like a victory to this other leader or administration from the perspective of their own people. And of course, I need that as well. Typically, right, if we kind of can expand beyond I'm putting tariffs on steel or I'm putting tariffs on your coffee, and look more broadly at a set of issues that might be important to the different countries, we can reframe and say, we've expanded this negotiation, we've looked at a bunch of different interests across maybe both trade and other economic incentives, and then announce something that feels like a win to both of us. So for me, whenever I'm in escalation, what I don't want to do is think about how do I embarrass them more? How do I make them feel more shameful? How do I kind of trap them, even though that might feel attractive?
Too bad. Yeah, that is so tempting.
Instead, it's how do I help them write a victory speech that also meets my interests?
House Republicans joining Democrats for a resolution to release all the government files on Jeffrey Epstein. While it's largely a symbolic gesture, it comes as President Trump has tried but mostly failed to dismiss his supporters' fervent interest in the case and what it represents.
So for background, we know that there are now all Democrats and a non-trivial number of MAGA Republicans who are insisting that the Attorney General and the Trump administration release the Epstein files. This was something that the Trump campaign ran on. It's something that Bondi personally said she would do. And of course, it isn't happening. So there's this movement then suddenly in Congress to basically pass a motion that would encourage the Attorney General to release these. And what does Mike Johnson do? He decides to adjourn the House of Representatives for its August recess earlier than usually planned. So what is this in negotiation terms? We could frame it in different ways. The positive framing is taking a break. The negative framing is delay and distract. From the negotiation perspective, though, what is Mike Johnson hoping to do? Now, I can't read his mind, but I think what he's hoping for, and this is when there is a good strategic use of a break is that the high emotions that everyone is feeling in the moment, the feeling of not being heard, ignored, aggravated, right? To take a month off just gives people a chance to calm down. And that maybe this issue will either go away completely or recede. Other thing it does, right, is buys him some time to go to those 10, 15, 20 Republicans who want the files released and try to have separate individual negotiations with them. So the use of a break, the use of a delay, right, can be highly powerful for someone in a complex negotiation. The danger here, of course, is that instead of this being experienced as a break, an opportunity to calm down, a chance to have some private negotiations, it's perceived as a way to delay and distract. And when people feel delayed and distracted and ignored, typically they don't calm down, they get more agitated. And so it's hard to know what's going to happen here. I think a lot of this has to do with how both sides in this negotiation use the issue over the next few weeks. But this, make no mistake, right, the decision to take a break is part of a negotiation strategy. And if you're in a negotiation, you need to always be thinking about how can I use a break as a way to de-escalate, help bring emotions down, that will help bring parties together in a constructive way. So those are my thoughts on what's going on here, and I think I'm not much one to make predictions, but if you had a gun to my head and said, Bob Bordone, do you think this is going away come September? I would say short of something really bigger and serious. So not the kind of distraction we've seen over the past few days, like President Trump suggesting that President Obama is guilty of treason, but something that really has some legs to it. Short of that coming up, I think that come September, Epstein is going to continue to be front and center. So, to learn more about handling complex emotions, de-escalating, creating value in negotiation, you'll want to go to the description below and click the link and buy my new book, Conflict Resilience, Negotiating Disagreement Without Giving Up or Giving In. It just made the USA Today bestsellers list, and I guarantee to you will get some great strategies there. Thanks for watching, and see you again next time. Okay, it's not difficult to keep watching. Click, click.